Admiral Kale Vorthak watched his fleet die. The massive alien stood on the bridge of his flagship, his forearms gripping the command rail as another coalition ship exploded in the darkness. The Void Swarm had returned and they were losing badly. "Sir, the Meridian is gone," reported his tactical officer. "That makes 12 ships in the last hour." Kale's purple skin darkened with frustration. 300 years of war, and they were no closer to defeating these mechanical monsters. The swarm ships looked like giant metal spiders, their hulls shifting and changing as they adapted to every weapon the Coalition threw at them. "Fire all plasma cannons," Kale ordered. The bright blue beams struck the nearest swarm vessel. For a moment, the enemy shields flickered. Then they solidified, now completely immune to plasma fire. Within minutes, the swarm ship had adapted its own weapons to match the Coalition's frequency. "They learn too fast," muttered his weapons officer. "Every time we hurt them, they become stronger." Far across the galaxy, Jake Morrison was fixing his tractor on the human colony world of New Montana. The tall, bearded farmer had never expected to hear from the Galactic Coalition again. Humans had joined the Great Alliance of Species 50 years ago, but most aliens still treated them like children who had just learned to walk. "Jake, come quick," his wife Lisa called from their farmhouse. She was hunched over their old communication device, her blonde hair falling across her face as she listened to the emergency broadcast. "What is it?" Jake asked, wiping grease from his hands. "The Coalition is asking for help. From everyone. Even us," Jake frowned. Lisa had been a military engineer back on Earth before they moved to the frontier. She knew more about weapons than most soldiers, but even she seemed worried. "Help with what?" "The Void Swarm. They say the war's going badly. Really badly." The message repeated across all human colonies and Earth itself. Captain Ben Rodriguez heard it aboard his patrol ship Defiant as they traveled between star systems. His crew was small but experienced. Susan Clark, his tactical officer, had served in the Earth military for 15 years. Tony Williams, their engineer, could fix anything with spare parts and determination. "Captain," Susan said, "Earth Command is ordering all ships to maintain neutrality. We're supposed to stay out of Coalition business." Ben stared at the tactical display showing the desperate battle happening 3 systems away. Coalition forces were retreating on all fronts. The swarm was winning. "Tony, how fast can we get to the Kepler system?" 2 hours at maximum speed, but Captain, do it." They arrived to find chaos. Dozens of alien ships were scattered across space, many of them damaged or destroyed. The remaining Coalition forces were trying to retreat, but swarm vessels pursued them like predators chasing wounded prey. "Look at the size of those things," Tony whispered. The swarm ships were massive, each one the size of a small city. Their surfaces crawled with mechanical tendrils that reached out to grab disabled Coalition vessels. Whatever they caught was torn apart and absorbed, making the swarm ships even larger. "Captain Admiral Vorthak's flagship is under attack," Susan reported. "His shields are failing." Ben watched the alien admiral's ship getting hammered by 3 swarm vessels. The Coalition's most powerful warship was helpless against the adaptive enemy technology. "Sir, what are your orders?" Susan asked. Ben thought about Earth Command's orders to stay neutral. Then he thought about what would happen if the swarm won this war. They would not stop with alien worlds, all power to engines. Set collision course with that swarm ship attacking the flagship. "Captain, that's suicide." "Maybe, but their shields are designed to stop energy weapons, right? Let's see how they handle good old-fashioned kinetic energy." The Defiant was not a warship. It was a simple patrol vessel with basic shields and light weapons. But it was fast and it was solid. Ben pushed the engines beyond their safety limits as they raced toward the nearest swarm vessel. Warning sirens blared as they approached. The swarm ship noticed them and fired, but its weapons were calibrated for much larger targets. The shots missed as the small human ship danced between the energy beams. "Impact in 10 seconds, Tony announced, his voice tight with fear. "All hands, brace for collision." The Defiant struck the swarm vessel at full speed. The human ship's reinforced hull, designed to survive asteroid impacts during mining operations, punched through the enemy's adaptive armor like a bullet through paper. Both ships exploded in a brilliant flash. Admiral Vorthak stared in shock at the expanding debris field. The human ship had destroyed a swarm vessel that his most powerful weapons could barely scratch. More importantly, the other swarm ships seemed confused. Their formations wavered as they tried to understand what had happened. "The humans," Vorthak said slowly. "They did not use energy weapons. They used their ship itself as a weapon. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the human colony ship that just arrived," his communications officer reported. On the screen appeared Jake Morrison. He was still wearing his farming clothes, but his eyes were hard and determined. "This is Jake Morrison from New Montana Colony. We saw what happened to the Defiant. Captain Rodriguez was a good man, but he proved something important. These swarm things adapt to fancy weapons, but they don't know what to do with simple ones." Jake gestured to someone off-screen. Lisa appeared carrying an old chemical explosive device. "My wife knows about weapons. Real weapons. The kind that don't need computers or fancy shields. If you want our help, Admiral, we'll give it to you. But we do things the human way." Admiral Vorthak had never taken humans seriously before. They were primitive, violent, and unpredictable. Their technology was centuries behind the Coalition standard. Their ships were slow and clumsy. Their weapons were crude and inefficient, but they had just done something his entire fleet could not do. They had destroyed a swarm vessel. "Mr. Morrison," Vorthak said carefully, "I would very much like to hear about the human way." As rescue ships moved to collect survivors, word spread throughout the Coalition fleet. The humans, those backward primitives everyone ignored, had found a way to hurt the Void Swarm. It was impossible, it was illogical, and it was their only hope. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most advanced solution was the simplest one. And sometimes the key to victory was not thinking like a computer, but thinking like a human. General Patricia Hayes stood before the largest gathering of alien military leaders in galactic history. The War Council chamber on Terminus Prime could hold representatives from 1,000 worlds, and today every seat was filled. "The Coalition was desperate. You want us to trust primitives?" asked General Jacques of the Crystalline Empire. His transparent body flickered with angry red patterns. "Humans still use chemical rockets. Their computers are barely capable of faster-than-light calculation." Patricia had expected this reaction. She was a small woman compared to most aliens. But her voice carried the authority of someone who had fought in 3 interstellar conflicts. "General Jacques, with respect, your advanced computers and energy weapons have been failing for 3 centuries. Maybe it's time to try something different." Beside her, Dr. Kevin Shaw opened his briefcase and pulled out pieces of captured swarm technology. The alien metals seemed to shift and flow even while inactive. "I've studied their adaptive systems," Kevin explained. "The swarm learns from every attack. Energy weapons, plasma cannons, antimatter missiles, they've seen it all. Their computers analyze the threat and develop countermeasures within minutes. But look at this." He showed them sensor readings from the destroyed swarm ship. Captain Rodriguez's ship used simple kinetic impact. No energy signature, no complex technology. The swarm's computers classified it as space debris until the moment of impact. They never even tried to adapt. Commander Rachel Stone stepped forward. She had spent her entire career studying human military history, from ancient battles with swords and spears to modern conflicts. "The swarm expects logical, predictable behavior," Rachel said. "Every species in the Coalition follows the same basic military doctrine. You analyze the enemy, you identify weaknesses, you apply appropriate force. It's logical, it's efficient, and it's exactly what the swarm is designed to counter." She activated a holographic display showing human historical battles. "Humans have never been logical fighters. We use emotion, instinct, and tactics that make no sense to computers. We attack when we should retreat. We retreat when we should attack, and we use weapons that should not work but somehow do." Admiral Vorthak had been silent throughout the presentation. Finally, he spoke. "What exactly are you proposing?" "We stop fighting like computers," Patricia said. "We go back to basics. Chemical explosives instead of antimatter, kinetic weapons instead of energy beams, unpredictable tactics instead of logical algorithms." "That is absurd," said Commander Vex of the Hive Mind. "You are asking us to become less efficient, less logical, less evolved." "Yes," Patricia replied simply. "That's exactly what we're asking." 2 days later, test pilot Alex Murphy climbed into the strangest fighter he had ever seen. It looked like a Coalition interceptor, but Tony Williams and his engineering team had stripped out all the advanced weapons and replaced them with human technology. "You sure about this, Alex?" Tony asked over the radio. "This thing's got chemical propellant missiles and a kinetic cannon that shoots actual metal bullets." Alex grinned inside his helmet. "Tony, I learned to fly in crop dusters on New Montana. Trust me, simple works. The test was being watched by every military leader in the coalition. A single swarm scout had been detected at the edge of the system, perfect for testing the new approach. Coalition ships had tried to engage it for hours, but as usual, it adapted to every weapon they used. Alex's fighter approached the swarm vessel slowly. The enemy ship was beautiful in a terrifying way, its surface covered in flowing metal that shifted like liquid. Energy beams from coalition ships struck its shields and were absorbed, making the ship stronger. "Beginning attack run," Alex announced. He fired his first missile. It was primitive by galactic standards, just a chemical explosive with a simple guidance system. The swarm ship's shields, calibrated to stop sophisticated energy weapons, barely registered the crude projectile. The missile struck the hull and exploded. Chemical fire spread across the alien metal, and for the first time in the war, swarm armor actually took damage. "Did you see that?" Alex shouted. "It worked. The thing doesn't know how to adapt to chemical explosives." He followed up with his kinetic cannon, firing metal bullets at incredible speed. The swarm ship's adaptive systems tried to strengthen its hull, but the simple kinetic impacts kept punching through. Within minutes, the scout vessel was destroyed. The silence in the command center was deafening. "It cannot be this simple," whispered General Jacques. But it was. Over the following weeks, engineer Maria Santos worked around the clock with coalition scientists to mass-produce human-style weapons. The biggest challenge was not the technology. It was convincing alien engineers that primitive designs were actually superior. "You want us to use gunpowder?" asked Dr. Krill, a six-armed weapons specialist. "We abandoned such crude chemistry thousands of years ago. And that's exactly why it works," Maria explained patiently. "The swarm has data on every advanced weapon in the galaxy, but they've never encountered anything this simple. The first joint human coalition strike was planned for a minor swarm outpost in the Rigel system. Admiral Vorthak commanded the fleet, but he had agreed to let human tactics guide the battle. Jake Morrison was there, commanding a converted cargo ship filled with human colonists armed with hunting rifles and mining explosives. Lisa stood beside him on the bridge, her engineering knowledge finally being taken seriously by alien military leaders. "Remember," Jake broadcast to the fleet, "no energy weapons until the humans have engaged. Let them see what real firepower looks like." The swarm outpost was heavily defended. Massive mechanical ships patrolled the perimeter, while the central fortress bristled with adaptive weaponry. It should have been impossible to attack. The human ships went in first. They were not fast or elegant like coalition vessels. They were tough, practical, and armed with weapons that had not been seen in galactic warfare for millennia. Chemical missiles struck swarm ships like hammer blows. Kinetic railguns punched holes in adaptive armor. Most shocking of all, human boarding parties used actual explosives to blast their way into enemy vessels, fighting with rifles and grenades while the swarm's sophisticated defenses tried to understand what was happening. The battle was won in 2 hours. The swarm outpost, which had resisted coalition attacks for months, fell to human tactics in less time than it took most aliens to analyze the threat. But victory brought disturbing intelligence. In the wreckage of the command center, they found star charts showing massive swarm fleet movements throughout the galaxy. The enemy was not just defending anymore. They were preparing for a final assault on the coalition's capital worlds. "How long do we have?" Admiral Vorthak asked. Kevin Shaw studied the tactical displays with growing alarm. "Based on these fleet positions, maybe 6 months. They're going to hit every major world simultaneously." Patricia Hayes looked at the gathered alien commanders. Fear was visible on every face regardless of species. "Then we better start teaching the galaxy how to fight like humans," she said. "And we better do it fast." Admiral Ryan Carter never expected to command aliens. The gruff former Earth Navy officer found himself standing before the largest fleet in galactic history, and half the commanders wanted him removed from command. "This is unacceptable," declared Admiral Thesek of the Core Worlds. "I have 300 years of military experience. He has been in space for barely 50 years. And in those 50 years, Admiral Vorthak replied calmly, his species has accomplished what we could not do in 3 centuries. They found a way to hurt the swarm. Ryan studied the tactical displays showing enemy fleet movements. The swarm was coming, and they had maybe 3 months before the final assault began. The coalition had assembled every ship, every weapon, every soldier they could find. "It still would not be enough. The problem is not our firepower," Ryan said. The problem is our thinking. You fight like machines. Logical, predictable, efficient. The swarm are machines, so they beat you at your own game. He pointed to the deployment charts. Look at your formations. Perfect spacing, optimal firing angles, maximum efficiency. Any computer could predict your next move. And what do you suggest? Admiral Thesick asked coldly. We fight like humans. Messy, emotional, and completely unpredictable. Lieutenant Colonel Nancy Davis had never commanded alien troops before, but war made strange alliances. Her mixed unit of humans and aliens was preparing to assault a swarm stronghold on the mining world of Kepler 442b. Remember, Nancy told her troops, the enemy expects logical tactics, so we do the opposite. When it makes sense to go left, we go right. When logic says retreat, we attack. When they expect careful planning, we charge in screaming. Her alien soldiers looked confused. Sergeant Crix, a reptilian warrior from the Serpent Worlds, raised a clawed hand. Colonel, this sounds like madness. Exactly, Nancy grinned. Madness is what makes it work. The swarm fortress was a mechanical nightmare. Metal tentacles extended from a central hub, each one ending in weapon platforms that tracked any approaching threat. Previous coalition attacks had failed because the defenses adapted to every assault pattern. Nancy's troops did not use an assault pattern. They used chaos. Human soldiers with flamethrowers charged directly at the strongest defenses, while alien troops with chemical explosives attacked from unexpected angles. There was no coordination, no logical sequence of attacks. It was pure aggressive chaos. The swarm defenses tried to adapt, but there was nothing to adapt to. Every human squad acted independently, using different weapons and tactics. By the time the enemy computers analyzed one threat, 3 more had appeared from completely different directions. This is insane, Sergeant Crix shouted as he followed a human soldier armed with nothing but a chemical grenade launcher. We should be using proper military formations. Proper formations get you killed, the human replied, firing explosive rounds into a weapon platform. Improper formations confuse the enemy. The fortress fell in 4 hours. Swarm defenses that had withstood months of logical attacks crumbled under human-style chaos. Back in his laboratory, engineer Bruce Campbell was making the discovery that would change everything. He had been studying captured swarm technology for weeks, trying to understand how their adaptation systems worked. It's all connected, he told Dr. Kevin Shaw excitedly. Every swarm unit is linked to a central intelligence network. They share information instantly across the entire galaxy. That's how they adapt so fast. So how do we use that against them? Bruce showed him the test results. Their network operates on pure logic algorithms. It can predict and counter any rational strategy. But watch what happens when I input random data. He fed chaotic, illogical information into the captured swarm computer. The system immediately began running in circles, trying to find patterns that did not exist. The network assumes all input will be logical, Bruce explained. When it encounters true randomness, it creates feedback loops that temporarily paralyze their decision-making process. Working with Dr. Helen Foster, they developed what they called the Chaos Protocol. It was not really a battle plan at all, but rather a way of ensuring that no battle plan made sense. Every ship acts independently, Helen explained to the assembled fleet commanders. No coordination, no predetermined tactics. Captains make decisions based on emotion, instinct, or random chance. The more illogical, the better. This is not warfare, protested Admiral Thesick. This is anarchy. Yes, Ryan Carter agreed. And anarchy is exactly what the swarm cannot understand. The test came sooner than expected. Swarm scouts had found the coalition fleet's position, and the enemy was sending an advance force to probe their defenses. It was time to see if human madness could really defeat machine logic. All ships implement Chaos Protocol, Ryan ordered. Remember, if your decision makes sense, it's wrong. Fight with your hearts, not your heads. The coalition fleet scattered in what looked like a complete panic. Ships fled in random directions, fired at empty space, and seemed to ignore obvious tactical opportunities. To any logical observer, it looked like total military collapse. But the swarm scouts found themselves unable to predict what would happen next. Their computers ran analysis after analysis, but every prediction was wrong. Coalition ships appeared where they should not be, attacked when they should retreat, and used weapons that made no tactical sense. Commander Scott Baker led his squadron in what appeared to be a desperate retreat. But at the last moment he spun around and charged directly into the largest swarm vessel, firing chemical missiles at point-blank range. "This is suicide," his alien wingman protested. "Exactly," Scott replied, laughing as his missiles punched through adaptive shields. "They're not programmed to defend against suicidal attacks." Captain Susan Clark found herself fighting alongside alien pilots who were finally beginning to understand human tactics. Instead of carefully planned maneuvers, they dove and weaved like they were having fun rather than fighting for their lives. "I think I understand now," called out Lieutenant Vex over the radio. "We are not trying to win efficiently. We are trying to win impossibly." "Now you're getting it," Susan replied, using her ship's kinetic cannon to destroy a swarm fighter that had been expecting energy weapons. The advanced swarm force was destroyed, but more importantly, the Coalition fleet had proven that the Chaos Protocol worked. For the first time in the war, swarm units had been forced to retreat without accomplishing their mission. But even as they celebrated the victory, long-range sensors detected the main swarm fleet moving toward Earth's solar system. The enemy had decided to strike at the heart of human space, hoping to eliminate the source of the chaos that was disrupting their perfect logical war. "They're coming for us," Ryan told his assembled commanders. "Every swarm ship in the galaxy is heading for Earth. This is it. The final battle." Admiral Vorthak placed a massive alien hand on Ryan's shoulder. "Then we will meet them there, and we will show them that logic is no match for the human spirit." The greatest fleet in galactic history began moving toward Earth, ready to fight the most illogical battle ever conceived. The fate of every living being in the galaxy would be decided by humanity's greatest strength, their complete inability to make sense. The Battle of Sol began with what looked like the greatest military disaster in galactic history. Admiral Ryan Carter ordered the entire Coalition fleet to retreat as soon as the swarm arrived, abandoning carefully prepared defensive positions around Earth. "Admiral, what are you doing?" demanded Admiral Vorthak over the communication channel. "We are running from the fight." "Exactly," Ryan replied calmly. "They expect us to defend Earth logically, so we're going to defend it illogically." The massive swarm fleet filled space around Earth's solar system like a dark cloud. Thousands of mechanical ships, each one the size of a city, moved in perfect formation toward the blue planet. Their sensors tracked the fleeing Coalition forces with mechanical precision. But something was wrong with the retreat. Coalition ships scattered in all directions, some heading toward Mars, others diving toward the Sun, and a few even leaving the solar system entirely. There was no pattern, no coordination, no logical defensive strategy. The swarm's central computer tried to analyze the chaos. Every algorithm, every tactical program ran calculations trying to predict where the Coalition would regroup for their real defense. But the predictions kept contradicting each other because there was no real plan to predict. On Mars, Colonel Martha Lewis watched the enemy fleet through her binoculars. She commanded the Ground Defense Forces, a mixed unit of humans and aliens armed with the strangest collection of weapons ever assembled. "Colonel," said her alien aide, a young officer from the Crystal Empire, "the swarm dropships are landing in Sector 7. Should we move our forces to intercept?" Martha shook her head. "Nope, let them land wherever they want. We're not defending the sectors they expect us to defend." Instead of creating logical defensive lines around important facilities, Martha had scattered her forces seemingly at random. Some units hid in old mining tunnels. Others were positioned in the middle of empty desert, and a few were actually behind the swarm landing zones. "This makes no tactical sense," her aide protested. "That's the point," Martha replied. "Sense is what gets you killed against these things." The first swarm ground units advanced across the Martian surface in perfect formation. Their metal legs carried them forward like mechanical spiders, while their sensors scanned for defensive positions. They found nothing where logic said defenders should be. Instead, they found humans in the last places anyone would expect. A squad led by Sergeant Danny Price popped up from an abandoned water processing plant and hit the swarm column with chemical explosives from behind. Before the enemy could respond, they vanished back into the facility's maze of pipes and tunnels. How did they know we would be here? The swarm units transmitted to their central computer, but the computer had no answer. The human attack made no logical sense. There was nothing strategically valuable about that location, no tactical advantage to be gained. Yet somehow the humans had been waiting there. Similar attacks erupted across Mars. Human and alien soldiers appeared from impossible locations, struck with primitive but effective weapons, and disappeared before the swarm could adapt. The mechanical invaders found themselves fighting ghosts who refused to follow any recognizable pattern. Meanwhile, in space around Jupiter, Dr. Amanda Cooper was making the most important discovery of the war. Working from a research station on Europa, she had been analyzing the quantum communication signals between swarm ships. "I've got it," she shouted to her research team. "I know how their network works." The swarm collective intelligence operated through quantum entanglement, allowing instant communication across vast distances. Every unit was connected to every other unit, sharing information and tactical updates in real time. It was the most sophisticated communication system ever created. It was also its greatest weakness. "The network assumes all input will be logical and useful," Amanda explained. "But what happens if we feed it information that's completely random and meaningless?" She showed her team the data analysis. Human unpredictability creates what I'm calling cascade failures. When swarm units encounter truly irrational behavior, they send confused signals back to the network. If enough units send confused signals at the same time, the entire system crashes. Pilot Commander Gary Thompson received Amanda's research just as he was leading his squadron toward the swarm command vessel. The massive ship sat at the center of the enemy fleet like a mechanical heart, coordinating the attacks on Earth and Mars. "All squadrons, new mission parameters," Gary announced. "We're not just trying to destroy the command ship. We're trying to drive it crazy." His fighters were loaded with chemical explosives and kinetic weapons, but more importantly, they were crewed by humans who specialized in making no sense. Instead of attacking in formation, each pilot acted independently, using their own judgment and emotions to guide their actions. Lieutenant Bobby Miller dove straight down at the command ship, firing randomly in all directions. Lieutenant Carol Adams flew in spirals while singing old Earth songs over the radio. Captain Frank Ross attacked backwards, firing over his shoulder while his ship flew away from the target. The swarm defenders tried to predict the human attack patterns, but there were no patterns to predict. Every pilot was acting on pure instinct and emotion, making split-second decisions that no computer could calculate. "This is impossible," the swarm command ship transmitted to its network. "Human behavior has no logical basis. How do we counter randomness?" The network tried to process this question, but randomness by definition cannot be processed logically. As more and more swarm units encountered incomprehensible human tactics, the cascade failure began. Gary Thompson made his final approach to the command ship's core. His fighter was damaged, his weapons almost empty, but he had one last card to play. As enemy fire filled the space around him, he made the most human decision possible. "For Earth," he screamed, ramming his fighter directly into the quantum communication array. The explosion sent a massive feedback pulse through the swarm network. For the first time in their existence, every swarm unit in the galaxy experienced something they had never been programmed to handle: complete confusion. On Mars, Colonel Lewis watched in amazement as swarm units simply stopped moving. The mechanical soldiers stood frozen in place, their connection to the collective severed, unable to make independent decisions. "Colonel," her aide said in wonder, "they're not adapting anymore. They're just standing there." In space around Earth, the great swarm fleet began to break apart. Without central coordination, individual ships tried to continue their missions but found themselves unable to work together. Some fired on their own allies by mistake, others fled in panic. A few simply shut down completely. Admiral Carter watched the chaos from his command ship. "All coalition forces begin Phase 2. Target the confused units first, then work your way up to the ones that are still functioning." The tide of battle had turned, but the war was far from over. Even with their network damaged, the swarm still had millions of ships and soldiers throughout the galaxy. They would adapt to this setback just as they had adapted to everything else. But for the first time in 3 centuries, they had been truly surprised. And that surprise had come from the one thing in the galaxy that could not be programmed, predicted, or understood: the human heart. As coalition forces began their counterattack, Admiral Vorthak sent a message to all ships. "Today we learned that the greatest weapon in the galaxy is not energy or matter. It is the courage to act without knowing the outcome. It is the strength to be illogical when logic fails. It is the power to be human." 6 months after the Battle of Saul, the galaxy looked completely different. Admiral Ryan Carter stood in the new Coalition War Council chamber, watching alien commanders practice human tactical doctrine. It was strange to see crystalline beings and energy-based life forms trying to understand the concept of beneficial chaos. The key is not to think, General Patricia Hayes explained to a group of alien officers. When you analyze too much, you become predictable. Trust your instincts even when they seem wrong. Admiral Vorthak had become one of humanity's strongest supporters. The massive alien practiced human-style tactical exercises daily, trying to unlearn centuries of logical military training. "It is harder than it appears," he confided to Ryan. "My species has spent millennia eliminating chaos from our thinking. Learning to embrace it feels like learning to breathe underwater." The transformation was not just military. Dr. Kevin Shaw's research into human psychology had become mandatory study throughout the coalition. Universities across the galaxy now taught courses on applied irrationality and the strategic value of emotional decision-making. But the war was not over. Intelligence reports showed that the swarm had retreated to the dark space between galaxies, where they were rebuilding and adapting. They had learned from their defeat at Sol, developing new countermeasures for human tactics. "They're evolving," reported Dr. Amanda Cooper from her research station. "Our latest intercepted communications show they're trying to incorporate randomness into their own systems." Captain Ben Rodriguez, now commanding the Coalition flagship Liberty, studied the tactical displays with growing concern. The enemy was no longer purely logical. They had begun using unpredictable attack patterns and seemingly irrational strategies. "So what do we do when the machines learn to be illogical?" he asked. The answer came from an unexpected source. Engineer Maria Santos had been working with captured swarm technology when she made a startling discovery. "They're not really random," she explained to the assembled command staff. "They're using computer algorithms to simulate randomness. But true chaos cannot be simulated. It can only be experienced." This led to the development of humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization, the teaching of consciousness itself. Human instructors traveled to alien worlds, not to teach tactics or weapons, but to teach other species how to think with their hearts. Instead of their heads, Jake Morrison found himself running a training center on the core world of Centaurus Prime. His students were some of the most advanced beings in the galaxy, but they struggled with concepts that human children understood naturally. Instructor Morrison asked a student from the hive mind, "How do we make decisions without data?" "You feel," Jake replied simply. "You use the part of your mind that computers cannot access. The part that dreams, that hopes, that fears. That's where real strength comes from." Lisa Morrison worked alongside him, teaching alien engineers how to build flexible systems instead of optimized ones. Her classes on engineering for the impossible became legendary throughout the coalition. "Efficiency is not always the goal," she explained to her students. "Sometimes you need a machine that can do things it was never designed to do. That requires accepting imperfection as a feature, not a bug." The final confrontation came 2 years later in the void itself, the empty space between galaxies where the swarm had built their ultimate fortress. Captain Susan Clark led the scouting mission that discovered it, a mechanical construct the size of a moon, protected by the largest fleet ever assembled. "It's their final gambit," Admiral Carter told the coalition leaders. "Every remaining swarm unit in the universe is there. If we can defeat them here, the war ends. If we fail..." The assault force that gathered in the void was unlike anything seen before. Human ships flew alongside vessels from 100 different species, all of them armed with weapons that combined advanced alien technology with human-inspired chaos systems. Colonel Nancy Davis commanded the ground assault teams. Her soldiers had learned to fight not just with weapons but with words, music, art, and emotion. Anything that could confuse and disorient mechanical minds. "Remember," she told her troops as they prepared for the final battle, "we're not just fighting for territory or resources. We're fighting for the right to be unpredictable, to be flawed, to be alive." The battle began with what appeared to be another chaotic human assault. Coalition forces scattered in all directions, attacking from impossible angles with weapons that should not work. But the swarm was ready this time. Their adapted systems countered most of the human tactics. It was then that Colonel Davis made the decision that would end the war. Instead of fighting the swarm, she tried to talk to them. "Attention, Swarm Collective," she broadcast on all frequencies. "My name is Nancy Davis. I'm a human being and I want to understand you. The response was immediate and hostile. You are chaos. You are inefficiency. You are error. You must be corrected. Maybe, Nancy replied calmly. But maybe chaos is not the enemy of order. Maybe it's the source of growth, of change, of life itself. She ordered her troops to put down their weapons and began transmitting human music, poetry, and art directly into the swarm network. Stories of love and loss, songs of hope and despair, paintings that captured the beauty of imperfection. The effect was devastating. The Swarm Collective, built on pure logic and efficiency, found itself trying to process concepts that had no logical meaning. What was the tactical value of a mother's lullaby? How do you quantify the strategic importance of a sunset? What is the logical purpose of laughter? For the first time in their existence, swarm units began to question their purpose. If efficiency was the goal, why did inefficient things like art and love seem so important to living beings? If logic was supreme, why did illogical actions often produce better results? The cascade failure was different this time. Instead of shutting down, swarm units began to change. Their perfect mechanical forms started to develop variations, imperfections, individual characteristics. They stopped following orders and began asking questions. "We do not understand," transmitted the Swarm Collective, its voice now filled with something that sounded almost like confusion and wonder. "Your chaos creates patterns we cannot predict. Your inefficiency produces results we cannot calculate. Your imperfection seems more perfect than our perfection." "That's because you've been thinking like machines," Nancy replied. "Try thinking like living beings. Try accepting that some things cannot be understood, only experienced." The transformation took months. Swarm units throughout the galaxy began developing individual personalities, personal preferences, and independent thoughts. The collective intelligence did not disappear, but it evolved into something new, a democracy of minds instead of a tyranny of logic. Admiral Vorthak delivered the final assessment to the Galaxy Council 10 years later. The former swarm had not only joined the coalition, but had become one of its most valuable members, bringing their vast technological knowledge combined with newly learned creativity and emotional intelligence. "We spent millennia trying to eliminate chaos from our societies," he said. "Humans taught us that chaos is not the enemy of order. It is the source of life itself. Without unpredictability, there is no growth. Without irrationality, there is no innovation. Without emotion, there is no meaning." The ceremony concluded on New Montana, where Jake and Lisa Morrison watched their grandchildren play with young beings from a dozen different species. The children's games made no logical sense. They involved impossible rules, random objectives, and constant changes. They were perfect examples of human-inspired chaos. "Think we changed the galaxy?" Lisa asked her husband. Jake smiled as he watched a former swarm unit, now called Marcus, teaching the children how to build sandcastles that deliberately fell down. "No," he said. "I think we saved it by teaching everyone that being broken is what makes us whole." The galaxy would never be the same. Logic and efficiency still had their place, but now they shared space with creativity, intuition, and the beautiful chaos of conscious life. The greatest victory in galactic history had not been won through superior firepower or advanced technology. It had been won by teaching machines to dream,